For kids in the 1950s, Halloween meant decorating the house, making costumes, carving pumpkins, and maybe even attending a costume party, all before trick-or-treating on Halloween night. Halloween parties seemed much more popular during the 1950s. Usually, they were small get-togethers with friends that involved games like bobbing for apples, scavenger hunts, maybe pin the tail on the donkey, or even a round of ghost stories. Parties also meant eating Halloween treats like popcorn balls and decorated cookies. Around the house, you may remember those orange and black paper streamers twisted together and draped across the room. Paper pumpkins that would open like an accordion and be used as a centerpiece were also popular. The 1950s was a time when costumes were generally made by hand. Although you could buy a mask from a store, the best part of Halloween was building your own version of a cowboy, a monster, or even a princess. Children would usually head out to trick-or-treat with their older siblings pretty early. But as night fell, flashlights were used to check how your candy stash was growing, and to navigate from house to house. Most parents stayed home and passed out candy, while the kids did the trick-or-treating alone. For much of the 1950s, kids were likely to get things like candy, coins, nuts, and even whole fruit. The 1950s was a great time to be a kid. Halloween in the 1960s wasn't much different from the previous decade. There were still no big box stores, but most of the 5 and dime stores carried basic decorations, which mainly consisted of pre-cut paper witches, ghosts, and pumpkins. Many other home decorations were still handmade, including the scarecrows you might find sitting on a porch. Some stores carried a small selection of masks, and a Halloween costume company called Ben Cooper became famous for selling costume kits with a plastic mask and a vinyl smock, which became more and more popular as the decade wore on. You probably remember wearing one of these plastic costumes because of the distinct smell they had. The song The Monster Mash was a favorite in the 1960s too, and it would often be played at Halloween parties and events. The festivities would usually begin after school and consist of carving pumpkins and getting dressed in your costume. The 1960s saw the popularity of pop culture costumes explode in the second half of the decade. You most certainly would have seen a member of the Beatles, a Batman, or a Snow White roaming around your neighborhood. Trick-or-treating would begin at dusk, and kids would carry a paper grocery bag, a pillowcase, or even a plastic pumpkin to collect candy. In the 1960s, kids would still receive fruit, but may also get homemade cookies, full-sized candy bars, or maybe even some edible wax candies, like Big Red Lips, Vampire Fangs, or even a harmonica. Once home, kids would dump out their loot and pick out the best pieces to eat first. Some parents would take the candy and put it on top of the refrigerator, so the kids couldn't eat too much, while other parents allowed the kids to eat as much as they wanted. By the 1970s, Halloween had become popular from coast to coast and was celebrated in just about every corner of the country. From the moment the weather started to turn a bit colder, fall activities began, signaling that Halloween was fast approaching. In the week leading up to Halloween, you most likely celebrated at school with crafts, treats, and maybe even a costume parade. During the 70s, costumes had shifted primarily to store-bought costumes. Ben Cooper costumes still ruled supreme, and characters from popular movies, TV, and music could be found everywhere you looked. Shopping for your costume was always a treat. A trip to Kmart or Grant's might have been in order, as you dug through the piles of plastic costumes searching for the best one. The 1970s saw the explosion of movie characters being licensed for costume use, and there was none bigger than the movie Star Wars. Halloween also became more popular during this time because of a shift in how we were entertained. Movies during this decade became more scary and shocking. The Exorcist, The Omen, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and finally the movie Halloween. These were big hits that had us all begging to be scared. This darker side of Halloween was a shift away from the wholesome fun which was experienced in previous decades. Urban legends about poison candy and razor blades had been circulating along with the growing awareness of stranger danger. So you most likely would find one parent following their kids around the neighborhood while the other stayed at home and passed out candy. Due to the fear of poison candy, companies began pre-packaging individual pieces for Halloween. The 1970s added an edge to Halloween that wasn't there before. It was fun to be scared, and it made Halloween more marketable, especially to older people. Haunted houses were big during this time, and once again it was about how terrifying they could make it. With all of the dangers lurking around Halloween, it is a wonder we all survived. From the flammable and quite sweaty plastic costumes, to the local legends that kept us up at night, Halloween during the decade of disco was exciting to say the least. For many kids growing up in the 1980s, Halloween was the highlight of the year. The decade of shoulder pads, big hair, and neon everything made it the perfect decade for Halloween. This was an era of huge pop cultural events, including the start of some of the biggest movie franchises, the birth of MTV, and the introduction of some of the most beloved mass-market toys ever, so there was plenty to choose from. Scary movies became mainstream in the 1980s. Friday the 13th introduced us to Jason, while A Nightmare on Elm Street brought us Freddy Krueger, both of which were very popular costumes during this time. For many during the 1980s, Halloween lasted well into the night, and as long as porch lights were still on, trick-or-treating wasn't over. The 1980s was still a quite paranoid time, so parents would often make you wear reflective tape so you wouldn't get hit by a car. This was also the decade where parents everywhere feared their kids would become sacrifices to the devil worshippers that hung out in the woods. This caused more and more parents to tag along with the kids as they made their way around the neighborhood. Then once home, they insisted on inspecting your candy to make sure it wasn't tampered with. The 1980s had so much going on that you might have also forgotten about some of the teenage Halloween pranks that would occur. Toilet papering trees and egging houses were the most popular, and also the most challenging to clean up. If you think back fondly on Halloween from the past, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I hope this video helped to conjure up some great memories for you. Happy Halloween! If you enjoyed this video, click on this playlist to watch even more. And as always, thank you so much for watching.